I guess I do have like a lot of notes that I guess the problem is I just save everything in one place, but it is like a lot of garble that probably doesn't need to be saved. Anyway, just like this that I'm saying right now. How you doing?
So our listenership.
Oh yeah.
If you looked at it on its head, it would be awesome. Like if you flip the graph upside down.
Like inverted it?
Yeah.
Like our numbers?
Yeah, it'd be really good.
Yeah, I would agree. I guess, yeah. We're not supposed to talk about that. We pretend that the world's listening.
The world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I'm not thinking about it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I hadn't checked in weeks, and I looked, and I was like, ooh.
Yeah.
Nice.
I didn't want to say anything.
I guess people really liked Foucault. I'm being sarcastic.
Well, yeah. No, I think Foucault was tough. But I don't know. I'm getting a lot out of doing this, regardless of whether people are listening or not.
I mean,
to be honest, yeah. I mean, I realize you. I don't know if you're finding it difficult to sort of do the weekly thing, but I'm happy that we're doing it weekly. I hope that you're able to.
I'm extremely unhappy.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I do look forward to this, I guess is all I'm saying.
Yeah. It's good.
I hope
it's
we
hard
continue.
To have time to do my homework, but it's good.
No, I know. And I guess that's what I mean is I hope we can continue this as we both get busy. And I mean, because there's going to be a period where I'm going to be way busier than I am now.
Right.
I also hope that we'll be able to push through it because beyond just sort of being a good thing to get me to sort of read something that's difficult, because I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yes.
It's also sort of creating an interesting archive for at least my thinking. I think you'd agree your thinking too, but I don't want to put that on you. But just like even just listening to some of the earlier episodes, I feel like my philosophy's changed a little bit. Like I'm not quite as against postmodernism as I think I started, mostly just because I didn't have a good conception of it.
Yeah. I've talked to people, including our mutual friends, about this, about how if people just hear somebody like Jordan Peterson, they don't have a good sense for postmodernism, because I kind of get the sense he doesn't have that great a sense for it.
Well, it's being defined as we go because we're living sort of in it, right?
But I feel like a lot of people who aren't in academic spheres hear it from somebody like, it's not just him, but he kind of talks about it a lot, or at least used to. Mm-hmm. And I feel like he didn't do a very good job of representing every aspect of it. Because I remember getting into conversations with people a couple years ago about postmodernism, and they were coming at it basically just like it's this evil deconstruction thing that's trying to destroy society. And it's like, well, yeah, I guess. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, it is trying to destroy society, but maybe for good reason.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, so here's an interesting question. Would you put Nietzsche, or do other people? I guess I should look this up.
Right.
I would put Nietzsche as, if not the beginning, one of the first philosophers of postmodernism.
Like a proto-postmodernist?
No, yeah, or even
which is like a hilarious statement.
Yeah, I know. Or even the first postmodernist.
Maybe. I don't get super nihilistic vibes from him.
Well, no, he just defined nihilism. I think that's why he gets. I mean, this is the thing, and this goes with the misreading of him. It's like he's describing a lot of things that then I think get attributed to him, like nihilism. I
think it's easy to do. I mean, because I would say the first few sections of the chapter we read today, I thought he was saying this was his opinion, and then I got to a point and he was like, but this is what all these other people think, and they would be wrong, or something like that. And it's like, oh, okay. I thought you were saying all that.
Like, okay, yeah, so that's a good sort of transition. So we're talking about the second book of Genealogy of Morals, right?
Yes. Guilt, bad conscience, and the like.
Right. And so I guess one thing is that these are apparently supposed to sort of stand on their own. They're not necessarily, the three essays aren't necessarily narrative, if you will.
Although, what's interesting is
they talk about similarity.
Reading this one in the context of the first one, this one makes more sense, especially as he's talking about noble ideals and resentment-based ideals.
Right. So I was going to say, this is actually okay, because you were saying you got through half of it, and I read the first half, like a few days ago.
Nice.
So my memory for that is fuzzier. So can you tell me again a little bit? You started talking about some things that you felt like he was saying.
Well, he starts off by talking about memory and promises, which I think is a pretty interesting framing of anything. I mean, right there, that kind of captured me as an idea about how memory and promises are, in a sense, two sides of the same coin, and they need each other. In order to make a promise, you need memory. And so it goes back to some things that we've talked about consciousness. And memory is, the past, promises are the future. So it's orienting yourself both backwards and forwards. And then he has the dichotomy between that and then forgetfulness, which is closer to the animal state. Right. But at the same time, forgetfulness specifically is the denial of memory. So it's a conscious seeking of the unconscious. It's not just not remembering. It's not remembering on purpose, at least to a degree.
Right.
And so that's how he starts. That's how he starts everything, which to me is a very strong start. And then he's going through talking about actions of will and sovereign individuals, and how the promise is in and of itself an action of will. And he doesn't say this explicitly, but I'm getting a sense that promising is something akin to godlike behavior, because he talks about how in order to promise, you have to have a very, very keen sense of the future, and you have to be able to interpret patterns. You have to be able to interpret what might happen, what your ability to do this thing in the future that you say you're going to do. That's quite a thing. Like most animals probably don't have that ability.
Now, that's a great point, because he ends the chapter by basically saying God, or the concept of God, is the ultimate creditor, and we're the ultimate debtor.
Yeah, that makes sense. From where I got it, seemed like that was kind of where he was building to, because I got where he was talking about justice systems and creating law, and we're definitely moving in that direction.
Right. Yeah, because, so that's, I would say, what his fundamental point is.
Right.
Well, he ends it by talking about the bad conscience. So I guess before we get into that, if I was curious you said that he was saying some things that you thought were his opinion, but you don't actually think they were.
Let me see if I can find where that was, because I think it was at the end of number 3 or 4, where it kind of seemed like he was saying all this stuff is what some people think, but of course that would be fallacious thinking, because it goes back to it's the whole genealogy of morals. People who are trying to create a genealogy of morals, people who are trying to historicize it, are going to be wrong sort of by definition. Here we go, the beginning of 4. At this point, we return to the genealogists of morals. To say it again, or haven't I said it yet, they are worthless. A brief span of experience that is merely one's own, merely modern. No knowledge or will to knowledge of the past, even less of historical instinct, of that second sight needed here above all. And yet they undertake history of morality. It stands to reason that their results stay at a more than respectful distance from the truth. And he then talks about how they have a problem where they're not properly analyzing the intuitions and the perspectives of ancient man and all that, and how they're looking at it from too modern a lens. And then he seems to suggest that he has the ability to take on the perspective of ancient man. But
right. No, and so this is my, I would say, bone with Nietzsche and all the philosophers too, because and this is where I get so arrogant to say that, oh, well, maybe I can rewrite and clarify even the things he's saying. Because I look at this the same way that I look at Foucault, is there's ultimately talking about consciousness. And he even, he explicitly talks about this, but he talks about it, again, I feel like he overcomplicates it by splitting consciousness up into bad conscious and good conscious and stuff like that.
Is it conscious or conscience?
He says conscience. And this is where...
Like the cricket.
Yes, exactly.
Jiminy.
But it's essentially your consciousness, right? That's what I'm saying. It's like he uses a lot of terms for the same thing, I guess is my point. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right though in that he's trying to say that he's trying to say basically what I'm saying, but I still also think that he's doing it in not quite the same frame because I'm arrogant.
Because he's copying from you.
But I think he's saying, yeah, we need to look at the fact that we're talking about consciousness. Yeah, he's copying from me. We need to look at it from the frame of consciousness, and the fact is that the animal man wasn't as conscious as the modern
animal man. Yeah.
Yes. Because then he goes in later and he talks about how basically the instinct that we use to survive in the wild, which was sort of like a murderous instinct, it's the will to power. It's the will to subvert and exert your will over other things, which allows you to survive in the state of nature. Essentially, I believe he's saying this. Then in the confines of society, it begins to turn in on itself. And this turning in on itself is ultimately destructive. And he makes an interesting point later because he goes in and talks about punishment. Right, so you're right. He starts out about talking about promises.
Right.
And then he talks about punishment because you go from talking about promises to punishment because if you don't fulfill your promise, then you get punished.
You need a spanking. Yes.
You need a spanking, yes. And Jesus, come on, Antooshka. This is a. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
So punishment. Well, I think, and along the way, he talks about what he defines as conscience,
right?
Which I think is interesting because if I remember, he says conscience is the resultant sort of self-talk that comes out of making a promise. Because what your conscience is what you say to yourself about whether or not you are pushing in the direction of fulfilling your promises or pushing away from it.
Yeah, I think so. But then, but it's interesting because, like, do you think he defines a grand conscience? Or because then he obviously talks about the bad conscience.
I didn't get to the bad conscience part.
Like on whatever this is, page whatever. Conversely, one can see who has the invention of the bad conscience on his conscience, the man of resentment. Because, it's interesting. He goes in and he talks about resentment,
I did get to that. That sounds familiar. What number was
that? It's like the end of the second paragraph of 11.
Okay.
So I think it's interesting he goes in and starts talking about resentment, too, after talking about punishment, after talking about promises. Right. So he goes to punishment because if you don't fulfill your promises, you get punished. Right. And then I think he goes to resentment because that is what I think happens when you punish people in society is you get a group of people, like as he says, the anarchists and anti-Semites who wallow in obscurity.
You pointed to me for both of them.
So I just meant the anarchists for you, of course.
Yeah.
No, but it's interesting because after all the talk in last episode about Nietzsche, because last episode's chapter, that is the chapter I think most people misread to think that he is an anti-Semite. Right. But he's explicitly talking about the anti-Semites derogatorily in this one. Yes. And also, but he says, that this punishment is what leads to sort of the resentful people, I think, essentially. But I could be wrong about that. But then he ultimately sort of, it's an interesting point because I kept also kind of trying to figure out what he believes here. And here's one sort of big belief that I was able to fish out, and this is at the beginning of 16. And it's about the origin of the bad conscience. Okay. And I think this is where he's getting at, because ultimately I think all of this is sort of saying, like, people obviously are they're looking at the origin of morality incorrectly. And here's, I think he's sort of, so he says, I regard the bad conscience as the serious illness that man has bound to contract under the stress of the most fundamental change he ever experienced. That change which occurred when he found himself finally enclosed within the walls of society and of peace. So, he's basically saying the bad conscience developed when we became civilized beings.
Right.
But this is where I might disagree and say, like, consciousness it's just consciousness that sort of developed and like, I don't know. I guess he's not saying, it sounds like he's saying the bad conscience is a result of being put in society, whereas I'm saying that the bad conscience is a necessity of civilization.
So I guess maybe we should define what the bad conscience is. So my understanding of conscience is what I was saying is, according to him, Nietzsche's meaning by conscience is your internal dialogue that is urging you to take actions that will help you fulfill your promises.
Yeah, I mean, conscience, maybe, yeah. And so bad conscience, I mean, I have bad conscience equals sometimes unexpected went wrong.
My guess is it's related to resentment.
Yes.
Because when he's talking about resentment, he brings up nobility, noble causes versus resentment-based morality. Because resentment-based morality is reactive. It's reacting to something. So the reason that the anti-Semites and the anarchists are resentment-based is because they're reacting to things that they don't like. They see something external, and that's where they're placing their morality. They're against something else in the world. Versus the noble man is basing their morality on their own action, their own promises.
Well, and and that's also, I feel like it's a fact, it's an understanding that all the things that we say are immoral,
right,
are constructions of society, which is why I was sort of saying Nietzsche is maybe the first postmodernist. Because I think that's more of what his point is that or maybe how he's saying it, rather. I think what you're saying is right. But that he's like, he keeps sort of emphasizing this point that, like the will to power. I mean, he has a whole book about it, but how the central prerogative of life is for power. And so all these base instincts that we sort of chastise in society are actually... And then again, thus, which creates the bad conscience, because as you sort of lock up those impulses, something has to happen with that energy, and it goes in and it destroys you. So I feel like that's more of what he's saying, is that we're looking at, he keeps saying it's not that this is the moral person, they're the super moral person, or they transcend moral.
Supra-moral.
Yeah, that's what, exactly. Yeah, supra-moral person.
Yeah.
And because it's like morality doesn't even exist for them. It's not a question.
Right.
Because these are just impulses that you have as an animal.
Right. Right.
But I don't know. But I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'm trying to find where he explicitly defines bad conscience. Because it does sort of like he all of a sudden starts talking about it. He goes from talking about just conscience to bad conscience. Yeah. Yeah. He makes an interesting point how in ancient Greece, whereas in Christian thought, it's like God is... we're the cause of all the sort of sin in the world, if you could say. Like, we have the original sin, and we're constantly begging for repentance towards God for absolution. In ancient Greece, it was, and sort of the ancient world more generally, it was like the sin was almost due to God. Like, you would say, like, oh, the person was acting this way because they were, whatever, like, infected with the spirit of the god of mischief. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
I'm not explaining this very well, but does that make any sense? Of like,
it does.
How there was a switch. It's like all the onus was put on us in I guess you could say the Christian thought, whereas back in the day, you would almost put the bad thoughts that you had on the gods. It's like a god came down and infected you with a spirit. Yeah, I know.
Well,
infected's a modern.
Well, one thing I thought was interesting is he was talking about, it might have been the same section, is he was talking about the sense that an individual is responsible for the crimes that they commit against another individual, and that the payback is on the shoulders of the person who committed the crime, versus a different way of thinking about it, where the person who has been violated or like had a crime committed against them is deserving of retribution, but it's for themselves. So if they've had their corn stolen and what is owed to them is 20 lashes, it could be to the person who stole the corn, or it could be to somebody else. It's actually it's that they are owed the satisfaction of retribution, versus the other person owes them retribution for what they have done to them. So he talks about how that's a very modern way of thinking about justice and morality, versus this older idea of the satisfaction in retribution itself. And then he goes into punishment and torture, and he talks about the festival of torture and it being a way of pleasing the gods. And then that makes me think of Jesus. Right. Because what essentially pleased Yahweh more than Jesus' crucifixion?
Well, yeah, I'm a little confused, though. So you're saying that the first thing, though, he was saying that in the ancient times, or whatever, the 2,000 years ago, morality for the person who committed the crime was that it was just for them? Or how were you describing that?
Let's see if I can find. I want to see if I can find it, because he talks about. We gotta fill all this dead air.
Yeah, sorry, I should do something.
Juggle.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, consciousness of power. I have that written in my notes.
Okay, here we go. Found it. Okay, so
thank goodness.
Section 4. I was way off.
Wow.
All right, so the criminal deserves punishment because he could have acted differently. This is in quotes. This perspective, I'm adding a little bit to make it make sense, is in fact an extremely late and subtle form of human judgment and interference. So the idea, why does a criminal deserve punishment? Because he could have acted differently. So this is...
Right.
I wasn't explaining it right. That's a much better way of putting it, because it's talking about the onus on treating every person as an active free will participant. In the situation.
That they have conscience.
Right. Whoever transposes it to the beginning, so people who use this perspective to think about how justice was thought about thousands of years ago, is guilty of a crude misunderstanding of the psychology of more primitive man. Throughout the greater part of human history, punishment was not imposed because one held the wrongdoer responsible for his deed, thus not on the presupposition that the only guilty one should be punished, rather, as parents still punish their children from anger at some harm or injury vented on the one who caused it. And then I am extrapolating from that, thinking about the idea of vicarious atonement, the idea of something like a whipping boy. That somebody needs to be whipped. I'm pissed off, and somebody has to get a beating. It could be anybody.
Well, and I think that is sort of a general idea he's getting at that maybe he hasn't defined super well, but the idea that there's an energy for power or whatever that exists, and that you used to maybe get it out in the whatever way, with sacrifice, whatever. But then as we became civil and we added memory, and then we assumed that everybody had memory, and then thus assumed that everybody understood if they did something that they were responsible because they had a pact that they would realize that, then I guess at some point, I don't know. I just lost my train of thought because I started thinking about my own memory. Jesus.
Yeah. Anything interesting about your memory?
Well, how it is very difficult. It's like there is this constant fear of losing the train, the connection between moments. And I think that's basically what he's talking about, though, is that at some point we develop consciousness, right? And we've talked about this. And when we did that, and then when we established that other people were conscious, then that's when sort of law began. But he is looking at it from the standpoint of the creditor and debtor, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
And I had never thought to do something like that, but
yeah, it makes sense. Actually, since we're on memory, just as a short aside, when I started reading it, I started thinking of a Zora Neale Hurston quote, how she starts her book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. It's about memory. It's not quite as philosophical, but I just think it's a cool quote related to memory that is kind of related. So, ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing, until the watcher turns his eyes away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. This is the life of men. Now, women forget all those things they don't want to remember, and remember everything they don't want to forget. The dream is the truth. Then they act and do things accordingly. So it made me... the reason I thought of it is when he was talking about the idea of forgetfulness, and the idea of forgetfulness being a conscious activity in a way, and this idea of, Zora Neale Hurston's talking about this sort of dichotomy of men and women, and men sort of seeking their dreams for their entire life until they realize they'll never attain it, and then they just resign themselves to depression. Versus women treating memory differently, as it's important to hang on to the important things so that you can always try and attain a goal, sort of a thing.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. It's making me think about, I was rereading a chapter from Oliver Sacks's Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat today, or this week, which was talking about a patient, the Lost Mariner chapter, about a patient with anterograde amnesia. And I think this actually might be the key to consciousness, understanding consciousness. I haven't teased it out, but it's this idea that if you think of memory very basically as just anterograde and retrograde, meaning the ability to make new memories, anterograde, and the ability to remember old memories, retrograde. Korsakoff syndrome, which occurs when you drink too much, essentially, for a long period of time, heavily, through destruction of the component called the mammillary bodies of the brain. This will cause an anterograde amnesia. So basically, and retrograde to an extent, but they'll still retain some memory. So basically, they'll be trapped in the moment. So I say this because it's like, are they still conscious? That's the big question that it happens. And the reason I bring this up is because, again, it's like whenever I read philosophy, Nietzsche, Foucault, whatever, Kant, they're all talking about consciousness, in my opinion, and by my estimation. And what Nietzsche keeps talking about is the idea that at some point we were not conscious, and then we were, and this idea of memory he brings in and he talks about it, and it's, again, to me, it's like he doesn't necessarily connect the two, though, which I think is interesting. But to me, of course, they're connected. That when you become conscious, you're going to have memory because it requires memory. And is this person, and maybe it's not just that it requires memory, it requires the ability to link the moments as you go, which is why, like, when you lose your train of thought, it's so frustrating and stuff. Because, again, you ask, what is consciousness? And in some ways, to me, it is this linkage of memory for a really long period, an almost infinite period. It's like the ability to link moments for an infinite period of time, and you lose that in an anterograde.
What about the forward
case.
side too, though, the projecting out?
Well, it's in time. So this is why I break it up as simply not the present and not present, because I'm saying you just link it into the not present, essentially.
So the future is, you're calling that memory too, or something like that?
Yeah, basically, yes. Because it's built on the same RAM that actual memory is. I don't know, though. I mean, what do you think about that, though, how I sort of always try to muscle this back into a conversation about consciousness?
I mean, I think it's right. I think we've talked about this before. There's a separation in philosophy between sort of man and animal.
Yes.
Animal state, things like that, and then like animal man and all that kind of thing. To me, it's a nice narrative for a philosophy treatise. One thing is, how does anybody know that humans used to not be as conscious? To me, that's just something that people are saying.
Well, it's the same question of how do we know animals aren't conscious?
Well, I'm saying, how do we know that 4,000 years ago we weren't about the same as we are now? Or 10,000 years ago. I mean, 4,000 years ago, I think everybody thinks we were about the same. But like 10, 20, 60,000 years ago. Sure.
No, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. There's the whole animal. That's a separate question. How do we know animals aren't conscious?
Well, the fact is we're basically talking about the idea that we came from animals. So at some point, we humans, there was a stage. This assumes.
I guess this is like this, or not an assumption. This is the assertion of the evolutionary model, right? That we're an evolved being, and at a certain point we had proto stages that weren't as evolved consciously as we are today, or something like that.
Yeah. No, I think.
And then an animal. I think we've talked about it before, but I think animals have not no consciousness, but varying degrees of consciousness. Like dolphins can plan out how they attack fish and stuff like that. And to plan requires the ability to project forward, at least somewhat.
Exactly. No, yeah, it requires memory too.
Right. And there's plenty of animals that can remember things.
Yeah. And yeah, which is why I go back to the anterograde amnesia case as an interesting one for consciousness, because it's true. It's like this patient could play checkers, but he couldn't play chess. He could do routine things that he still remembered. His cerebellum
could
was
he
still
relearn
intact.
chess, or that no way?
It's like if the instructions were within the kernel of the working memory, essentially.
I see.
Which is like 5 minutes, you know, or at least in his case, 5 minutes. Yeah, if it was within,
so there was no way to
minutes,
reintegrate.
if you did it for a long time, and this is where it gets very complicated, and this is where I think every philosopher that tries to talk about consciousness and does it without understanding the nervous system to some extent, I think is I mean, it's already a fool errand to try to understand consciousness in a sense, but it's even more if you're not thinking about the hardware that underlies it, in my opinion. And so I'm saying, the reason I say that is because when you say, could he not even remember anything after like a few repetitions? It's like, it depends on what you mean by remember,
right?
Because the body has some modalities of remembering that are not conscious, right? Which is what the point of why it's so difficult to say an animal has the same level of consciousness as a human just because they can do procedural things, just because a dog can do a procedural task.
Right.
And show some type of memory doesn't necessarily mean that they have the same level of consciousness.
Well, I wouldn't say it's the same. I would say some level.
Exactly. I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm just saying, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just sort of saying that generally as a principle. Because, I think we agree that there's a spectrum of consciousness, right?
Because also, if a dog can have anxiety, I feel like anxiety requires a certain level of consciousness.
Yes.
To worry.
Because it's trepidation about what could happen.
Right. And anxiety we could be using the wrong word for what animals are feeling, too. But.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like they're feeling cortisol, which is, again, going back to if you want to understand it, basically how it is essentially maybe the same thing. Is it like we have cortisol and then we have all these thoughts that occur when we have cortisol in our system. Right. They have cortisol in their system. Who knows what thoughts that they have. But it's like, to me, it almost seems like consciousness is like I was saying, sort of the number of moments that you're able to string together coherently, essentially.
Okay. Sure.
And which is why there's levels to it, I guess. Because, if we humans think of ourselves as the pinnacle of it, we can string a lot of moments together in our head to make a coherent narrative to follow the logical sequence. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you have a limit to only 5 minutes of your memory, you're not able to do that, which is why I asked the question. I don't know if I would say that Korsakoff patient in Oliver Sacks's book was conscious, which is kind of controversial because, Oliver Sacks talks about this, whether he thought it too, right? And even sort of debating with a nurse who thought that he was conscious. Anyway,
a thought I just had was: are we using a whole bunch of different words just to mean human?
Well, what do you mean by human?
So if we define consciousness. Yes. As this special trait that only humans have, is that just the same thing as saying human?
But I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it's a spectrum, and we just have maybe the most extreme phenotype.
Right.
But it's not, and I didn't think you were saying that either.
I'm not saying, no, I'm definitely not saying it. I don't think that you were saying it. It's something I hear a lot, that animals are not conscious.
I feel like I hear the more popular opinion now, at least people in our generation, is to think that everybody has some level of consciousness. Right. Like all animals.
It's crazy to me experientially, because you can just interact with an animal and be like, oh, this thing is like
there's something
awake.
But it's that question of like what's awake versus a very quick reactive thing. And this is what I'm trying to work out, because I sort of feel like the way to think about consciousness is to, again, think about the origin of it. Right. And I've been thinking about it in the context of the reflex arc. Right. I don't know if I've talked about this, and I don't have to talk about it now, but the reflex arc is just a reaction, and so
right.
Right.
Does a dog have will?
Right. Exactly.
I don't know.
But
does a cactus have will?
Yes. Yeah. A cactus that can change itself has will, which is why the hand is an interesting other sort of point, the opposable thumb sort of action. It's like dolphins are really smart, but they don't have the same capability to affect their environment that we have.
Like a raccoon.
As us.
Right.
Like we have this unique ability to be smart and also have this ability to affect our environment much more. And I think, and then once you can do that, then you can really feed back and that's another point that Nietzsche, just to bring it back to him, makes the point a lot in this chapter about how we've basically have been. He has a great line. It was one I was thinking about posting on Instagram, but I even thought it would be a little bit too much. It's essentially about how we've vivisected ourselves into consciousness. You were mentioning through the punishment, right? But like we've selected for humans that are going to, we modern men are the heirs of the conscience, vivisection, and self-torture of millennia. This is what we have practiced longest. It is our distinctive art, perhaps, and in any case, our subtlety in which we have acquired a refined taste. Man has all too long had an evil eye for his natural inclinations, so that they have finally become inseparable from his bad conscience. An attempt at the reverse would in itself be possible, but who is strong enough for it? That is, to wed the bad conscience to all the unnatural inclinations.
Unnatural inclinations.
Yeah.
I'm hung up right there. What
this is where he's, I think, saying essentially, because he goes into a whole thing about how he's the Antichrist, or how there needs to be an Antichrist that comes up to counteract what he talks about in the first book, the slave revolt, if you will, of morality. And so I think here he's basically saying you need to connect the idea that we have this bad conscience, which we said came out of
the devil rather than Jiminy Cricket.
Well, I think it's the idea that you lean into stop looking at the instincts as if they're bad and look at them as their instincts.
Right.
All those aspirations. I mean, I think this is actually kind of interesting. And this is the last page. So if you want me to read on or no?
Yeah.
This is story time. Story time with Nietzsche. Okay. All those aspirations to the beyond, to that which run counter to sense, instinct, nature, animal, in short, all ideals hitherto, which are one and all hostile to life, and ideals that slander the world. To whom should one day today, with such hopes and demands? And then one would have precisely the good men against one, and of course the comfortable, the reconciled, the vain. Here, and then so he goes on and he says, is it even possible today, but someday in a stronger age than this decaying, self-doubting present, he must yet come to us, the redeeming man of great love and contempt. Great love and contempt. This is you, Antooshka. The creative spirit whose compelling strength will not let him rest in any aloofness or any beyond, whose isolation is misunderstood by the people as if it were flight from reality, while it is only his absorption, immersion, penetration into reality, so that when he one day emerges again into the light, he may bring home the redemption of his reality, its redemption from the curse that the hitherto reigning ideal has laid upon it. Where does he say it? Yeah. And then, this man of the future who will redeem us not only from the hitherto reigning ideal, but also from that which was bound to grow out of it, the great nausea, the will to nothingness, nihilism, this bell stroke of noon, because this is what he's saying. Somebody needs to come to get us out of nihilism. Nihilism is an outgrowth of the resentment, of resentment, and this bell stroke of noon and of the great decision that liberates the will again and restores its goal to the earth and his hope to man, this antichrist and anti-nihilist, this victor over God and nothingness. He must come one day. So anyway.
I mean, that's awesome. But.
And then he goes and writes the Antichrist.
I love it. It's really good.
Yeah.
I wish I'd gotten that far. That's exciting.
Yeah, it is. No, it's a great way to end it.
Yeah.
Because then he
starts talking about Zarathustra.
Right. He says, but what am I saying? Enough. At this point, it behooves me only to be silent, or I shall usurp that to which only the younger, heavier with future, and stronger than I know.
Ridiculous.
Right. Exactly. And then he talks about Zarathustra. So, because I love that. In actually The Twilight of Idols, he has a great quote where he basically breaks the fourth wall. And he's like, all people are misunderstood. Especially me, after they die, especially me or whatever. So, he knows what's going on.
Nice. All right.
Anyway,
so there's 2 bones to pick.
Yes.
One of them is, I feel like there's like an elephant in the room with the chapter. Maybe not.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, when he's talking about the experience of pain is wild.
Mm-hmm.
As relating to, I think it's relating to consciousness and levels of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that as you gain more consciousness, the experience of pain might be stronger.
Right.
Or something like that. And
he does have...
I read this section a couple times because I wanted to see if I felt like this is what he was saying. But basically,
you would have to bring that part up. Jesus,
it's in the chapter.
I'm gonna have to cut this part out. I'm cutting this part out. I'm already.
Well, actually, I almost feel like
I don't want to talk.
I almost feel like it's not good to not bring it up.
Why? It's not. I don't think it's that big of a part of it.
It's not.
We can talk about the pain and consciousness part without talking about that part.
But that makes it way too on the nose. Then it makes it seem like you're hiding something.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I'll leave it up to you. Yeah. Anyway,
God, you little trickster.
Right. I don't think his point.
You've been infected with the god of mischief.
I don't think that his point about these people is. I don't think the racial aspect of it matters. I think that his point has to do with consciousness increasing your experience of pain.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Which I think I need to think about this because I think there's something very interesting here that I've also been thinking about. And he talks about, because it's like he talks about how basically punishment is doing the opposite of what we think it's supposed to be doing. We think punishment is bringing out the goodwill, the will that says that the guilt. It's bringing out guilt, but actually it's bringing out this animal instinct of like, something unexpected happened that was bad. Now I need to be more mischievous and more paranoid, and so I don't know. I keep getting myself just
so here's my thought on it. I think that maybe where the truth in that lies is not necessarily that the momentary experience itself is extremely different, but with the memory of consciousness, you add on to the experience of pain also fear and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're afraid it's going to happen again, and you're worried that it might happen again, or you're afraid of what happened, like you remember how bad it was, and that makes you scared, and you're anxious that it might happen again.
Mm-hmm. But it's this interesting idea of how too much pain can actually push you into the animal state forever. He sort of talks about that. He doesn't. He kind of pushes up against that idea. I think he believes that. And I believe that. It's like it's the idea of how with today's penitentiary, prison systems and whatnot, how you almost, if you put somebody in there, they're less likely to become reformed because they're going to go in there and probably be hardened by the life because it's just It's a tough life in jail. And that's, I think, essentially what he's saying. He's just saying it very intellectually of how, and that's where I think maybe he's getting at with this consciousness versus pain thing too, where, I don't know. It's like a more conscious person is going to have more memory of the pain, and thus, or they'll be certainly more aware of it as it's happening, which I think is one point he was making.
Well, I just don't know how you would know that. I get it as a supposition, like perhaps with increased consciousness comes increased sensitivity to pain. Could be true, but it'd be hard to know if that. It'd be hard to test that.
Right, which is what the point everybody would make to his, which is the point that's countered to the points that he's making. Because, I mean, those points that he makes are still made in a sense, right? Or at least that's what, people contend. No, and it's the same idea, if you want to call it pain or just sensitivity to cold. And I think I've talked about it, but like if you read Walden, there's a part in there where Thoreau is describing how he's sort of inside, bundled up in the winter, northeast winter, and he's freezing. And then he's looking outside at Native Americans who are like in shawls, and have exposed skin, are near a fire, and they're okay. And it's this question of how maybe there is something that we've forgotten, and this is something that like the Iceman, if you know, Wim Hof sort of gets at, because it's like even I think about my ancestors is like there was a way that we lived in intense sort of conditions and probably much more painful conditions than now, and for probably a really long time. And there is a question of how did we do that? Like how do you live in Scandinavia before there's heat? It's like, question is, and the answer is that you had a greater tolerance to cold, and maybe if you weren't conscious, which I would say. Also,
if there's no option, there's no option.
Well, yes.
I mean, sometimes you just got to put up with a lot of pain.
Yeah, but there is a physiological component to it of adaptation potentially.
It's true, but if you think about it at a lower level, like we both grew up somewhere with very cold winters.
So we have more brown adipose tissue.
But like we didn't like run away from home when we were 5 because we were like, screw this is way too cold.
Right.
Like we just dealt with it, and you just go outside when it's -20 and you walk to your car and whatever. And so we have our ways of dealing with it, which are way more comfortable than in, 14th century Scandinavia. But they probably, they had fires. They had their things that were, you did this to this to this.
But I'm talking about like 4000 BC Scandinavia.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think my point is the same. My guess is that they did the same thing.
Yeah, no, but I don't know, because again, it's this. As I was saying, there's a physiological component. I'm talking about brown adipose tissue. I'm contradicting myself because I think really what we are talking about, though, is this interesting ability of our minds to tell us that we don't want pain.
Right.
We define pain, and maybe pain is relative then, it's basically what we're saying.
Sure.
And if you're more aware of it, your span of pain is going to increase, so you'll be more sensitive to it. I don't know. I'm just blathering right now, but I don't know. I don't know. I think there is something very interesting with pain and consciousness, though. And because I do think there's an ability of like too much pain to bring you out of consciousness.
Right.
It's like which is why, like, if you torture somebody, they're going to become, you're essentially pushing them out of consciousness. They're going to, because you can't sit in that moment conscious. It's just you would go crazy. So you have to come up with an escape plan. And I think the way that your body deals with that is by turning off consciousness, because it's the only thing that I could think of that you would have to do that.
But like if you kill a fly, you know, you like torture a fly, it like screams and stuff. And I don't think we think of flies as super conscious.
No. Well, that's the thing.
And it'll be like the whole time.
I mean, well, and this is where, and this is where it's a contradiction, because in some ways, pain will bring you out of consciousness, but it also brings you into the moment.
Right.
And because every animal will scream if it's being maimed. I mean, if you look at like a deer that's being just got it screams.
Yeah.
And it is this question of like, is there this all of a sudden this existential realization about what's going on? Is this animal brought out into a higher plane of consciousness by the pain that's happening?
Nice.
So I think there is
very Hellraiser. Yeah.
Is that Hellraiser? I don't know.
Yeah, didn't we talk about that on an episode? Maybe we didn't.
You brought up Hellraiser on an episode, yeah. But I don't remember how it applies, sadly.
Oh, it's just that pain and pleasure are the same thing. And if you experience ultimate pain or ultimate pleasure, you're brought to this next level of being, kind of a thing.
Right, and that right. When we were talking about Foucault, because then brought up how Foucault's a sadomasochist.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Full circle, man. The full sadomasochist circle. Well, yeah, I mean, we didn't figure it out, but there's this, you see what I'm saying? How it's like, because I keep wanting to say that pain brings you back to consciousness, but then this is where it almost feels like, we're talking about two different states of awareness.
Though, because if consciousness is the projection, pain is very of the moment.
That's what, exactly. Yeah. Which is why it's weird that you could, it wouldn't be right then to say that screaming, that's, I guess, the point. Screaming is an indication of consciousness, as you were saying with the fly example.
Well, it's an indication. No, it's an indication of the experience of an intense experience of pain. That's what I was saying. Not an indication of consciousness.
Oh.
That the fly is obviously experiencing a lot of pain.
Right.
Or something. It's experiencing something it doesn't seem to like very much.
Right.
Well, and if pain is an indication of consciousness, it's like a skip, hop, and a jump kind of thing.
Yeah, no, well, or if we think of it as if it's conscious because we see screaming and then we think of ourselves.
I'm not saying it's conscious. I'm saying it's experiencing pain, and then what what Nietzsche was saying is that the intense experience of pain is a sign of consciousness.
Right.
And so following the trail.
No, I know, I know, and that's what I keep saying is I don't know if I agree with that. But in some case, I also see why he's saying that. But this is where I'm saying of like, it's also just a reflex, because pain was just a reflex to bring attention to something bad that's happening.
Right. And maybe shrieking is a reflex to try and get someone to help you.
Yeah. Dude, I think I brought up the fact that, like, it's also interesting that human babies are the only babies that come out crying and screaming, to a sense, out of all the animals.
I didn't know that.
That was a point that I read in, I think it was Pliny the Elder.
Oh, nice.
Who was a Roman physician. Made a very interesting...
Babies
he was an encyclopedia. Sorry.
They're like, hey.
What's that?
Babies don't like coming out very much. They're like, what the hell?
Well, exactly. So if pain is an indication of consciousness, I mean, then so are the babies conscious? Of course not. I don't know if he was saying that. I guess
of course not. Well, they're a little bit conscious, aren't they?
Yeah, but not to the degree that we are now.
Right.
Yeah, of course not. I think that's pretty established that we increase consciousness through our lifetime.
Yes. I agree. I see it in my current baby.
Yeah. Well,
every week there's more increased consciousness.
Yeah. Object permanence, man.
Object permanence, bro.
Yeah.
So the other bone I had to pick, I don't know, it's like a soapbox of mine. So I don't know if we need to do it. It's a society bit.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
We already did this bit, though. We're rehashing old bits now.
That's okay. We can rehash it.
So he goes from the pain thing that we were talking about to then start talking about debtors, people in debt versus people owed debts, and then talking about justice. And he works his way all the way to people who break the laws of society as being in debt to society because they've stolen something or taken something. Taken something. Taken something from society, in a sense. Mm-hmm. And it's just one of my I guess it's a soapbox about, I gotta find what I wrote about it, but the sense that I don't understand when people talk about something being taken from society, when you owe a debt to society or something like that.
I was re-listening to this episode where we talked about this. I think I still disagree, because this is the argument where you use System of a Down, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So here I have a different way of putting it. So let's say that your city collects taxes to build stop signs.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the societal stop signs. Society says that you can't break these stop signs. And you go and break all the stop signs. If, I would understand it at least somewhat, if what had to happen now is you have to pay $2 to everybody in that city, because $2 was taken from them for those stop signs. Essentially, you need to put the stop signs back. You broke them, you didn't own them, the city owned them. And what is the city? I don't know, but that's never what happens. It's you owe a debt to society, so you pay them or you go to jail. They don't get the stop signs back. They have to take $2 again from everybody for more stop signs, and the people don't get their money back. So the debt has not been paid.
So I'm sorry though. What's your point? I mean, your point's the debt hasn't been paid, but
my point is I think that it's meaningless to say that you owe a debt to society. Unless what you mean is you literally owe every person in that society.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a symbolic.
I understand that, Disney Corp can sue you, but I think that that's a mistake.
Yeah, well, I bet you don't like super PACs either.
Right. I mean, it doesn't matter what I think. I can still be sued by Coca-Cola.
No, I mean, but it's a good question. I mean, because, what do you think about corporations generally? Because corporations essentially are these
entities. I think that they're a fiction that should not have legal rights the way they do. I don't think that it's like when we talked about System of a Down. I don't think it's evil to come up with, a band name. Or a brand name. I don't think it's evil to have Coca-Cola be the name on the building.
You just don't like to say that when we say as if they have volition, but this is where I feel
volition or rights or any fiction, I don't think can be owed anything.
Right. But this is where I would question whether you would feel wouldn't you say that we are a conglomeration? I made this point when we first talked about this, that our bodies are we're made up of a bunch of cells.
Sure.
So how could you say that we have volition, if we're a bunch of cells?
Just because we have consciousness. There's assumptions. It's riddled with assumptions. Yeah.
Well, maybe there's just a more defined unity. That seems to be it. It's like there was just a more defined unity that represented System of a Down, that rather than right now, you
if
can't
System
get
of
over
a Down were the Borg or something.
Right. Where if it was did you say the Borg?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, or just because this is where I'm saying it's kind of semantic. Okay. I mean, it is semantic, right? I mean, it's by definition semantic. But
I think it's substantial. It's the same. It's the same thing where the reason I don't think that taxation is a reasonable thing to do is because I don't see it as I'm paying myself, like the public is owned by everybody. So I don't see that I am paying everybody for there to be roads. There's an organization that calls itself everybody, but really it's like 30 people or 100 people or however many people make up, the city of Austin government.
And they represent the will of the people.
But that's silly. I mean, they can say that all they want. But they just decide, like, we need this amount of money. And so they're like, okay, we're going to take that from everybody.
But I mean,
nobody has the option.
No, but I mean, it seems to me to say that you're against the idea of abstracting one thing from a group in any context. Like, are you okay with abstracting a group into one thing? You must be, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I could say University of Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. That's a name for a piece of land, some buildings, and a bunch of people. Mm-hmm. And that name kind of encompasses all that stuff. I think that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But when you start saying that you owe the University of Oklahoma things, we start to get into weird territory.
Right, but how do you discuss a group and the volition of a group? Can a group have volition? You seem to say no.
I don't know if a group can have volition.
I mean, basically,
we can pretend that a group has volition. Like,
right.
You can say that you owe the University of Oklahoma this amount of money for
that's my point, though.
The University of Oklahoma.
That's my point, though. Is we're pretending already when we abstract a group into one thing. So it's just another pretend thing. So why is that? But that's my point.
Right. I mean, it's another pretend thing.
We're already playing pretend. Why can't we step one more level into the pretend play?
I don't want to. That's why.
Okay. Well, okay. But I'm glad we got there.
Right. I don't want to play.
Because I will be honest, I listened back to that and I was like,
yeah, you don't agree.
I still don't agree because this is why I think I don't agree, because I think this is what you're ultimately saying, I think, is that you have an issue with abstracting things and putting abstractions onto groups of things.
I don't have a problem with abstractions. I have a problem with, so now you've had an abstraction. What is reasonable to do with that abstraction? What isn't?
Yeah, but so the question is, and it seems you would say no, is it reasonable to put volition to a group of things? And that's why I gave the example of us, because I'm like, we are a group of things, but we give ourselves volition. But this is the thing: is some people. This is why I think it's a debate of whether this is why free will has been a debate for over a millennia, right? Because of, in a sense, we're basically talking about that,
right? I mean, it's the whole, like, it's the silly, like, are corporations people and whatever. Mm-hmm. And what's silly about that argument is all the people who are mad about the ruling that corporations are people are happy to treat any number of other weird fictions like people. And and all the people who want to say corporations are people, like, it's a little bit weird why they would or wouldn't want to say that. I understand why it's useful from a tax perspective.
Right. Well, and from the perspective of just, like, if you want to do complex things, you have to abstract a bunch of things into...
Yeah. So here's the Foucault in me. I think the problem comes in the fact that it shelters people from true responsibility. Because if the CEO of Coca-Cola is... I'm not saying that they're doing this at all. Let me just say the CEO of Cola X. The CEO of Cola X, the fake cola company, is putting poison intentionally. Is allowing poison intentionally to be put in the product, and people are dying and stuff like that. And so everybody's suing Coca-Cola. No money comes out of his pocket. Mm-hmm. None. He doesn't go to jail. Nothing like that. The company. The company will have some bank account under the company's name, and he gets to keep all his money.
He would go to jail. I mean, the thing is, CEOs go to jail. Actually, that's a very bad example. I'm sorry, because CEOs go to jail for, like, food when, like, salmonella the salmonella stuff in peanut butter, when that became an issue.
Well, CEOs go to. I'm aware of CEOs going to jail for defrauding their companies of money.
If they were poisoning, if somebody was poisoning a drink,
no, this has actually happened. People, poisoning a drink, but things like toxic waste and things that are like poisoning environments and stuff like that. Nobody goes to jail. But the company gets fined or shut.
Okay, that's a better example, though. You were saying poisoning the drink, and I'm saying if that was found out, somebody would go to jail.
I don't know. I'm not. There's pharmaceutical companies that are doing things or have done things, and nobody goes to jail.
Well,
they're actually sheltered.
But you said explicitly poisoning. That's my point. It's stupid. Anyway, but let's meet in the middle. I hear what you're saying when you say like putting waste in the environment and then just the company gets fined. Or let's take the Oxycontin stuff, right? Or pharma, Purdue Pharma. There's a question of like, are they basically getting out by just being sheltered by the LLC that they formed? And should people be able to go after...
actual people who made those decisions within the company are not specifically punished.
Well, and they're dead. I mean, that's part of the issue.
Sure. And the same thing is true with governments. The same thing is true with all, like, let's say the government has some program that they think is going to make everything way better, and they take tons of people's money and they do all this stuff. What happens if it doesn't work? Maybe they don't get elected again, but nothing real.
No, well, but this is, I mean, you're putting your finger on the I would say the reason people form groups.
To get out of liability.
Yes, it's to just, yes. I mean, it's not the reason, but it's one of the big benefits, right? Yes, I mean, it's, and this is why everybody talking about like Fauci going to jail. It's like Fauci's not going to go to jail, nor do I think he should, because of the fact that if anything did go wrong, the responsibility is distributed in the network of the medical establishment and everything. Because
nobody will go to jail.
No, but things might change. That's maybe we're reformed. I mean, things are already changing, I would argue. And that's, I think that is a healthy way to do it. And this is the thing is, I don't think it's actually a good, because it sounds like what you're getting at is we should know exactly who to punish, right? This is the problem.
I mean, it's not just punishment. It's that people should have the responsibility of the liability of their decisions, especially when they are making decisions for others.
Yes. However, it's the idea is when you have a system that has a large enough network of people, the amount of people that are thinking about a problem is bigger. Thus, the probability that something is going to go wrong is, I would say, less, which is why you can also sort of distribute the responsibility too. I don't know.
But if it's a normal situation, like you hire somebody to make a website for you, and they do a really bad job, you're either going to fire them or just not hire them again if it was contract work.
Yes. Yeah.
They have the liability of their own labor. They have to do the job, or you're not going to hire, or you're going to fire them. That's a normal relationship. And the problem is these very, very large, like legal fictions, end up where that all gets flipped on its head, and nobody has any liability for anything. But they have leeway to make decisions, which makes very little sense to me.
Well, it is the idea that people should step down and stuff like that. No, I mean, it's like everybody's like, oh, well, that's not enough. But, like, I don't know. I mean, this is, I think, it's funny because I feel like I am in the position where I'm defending bureaucracy, which is sort of hilarious if you talk to me in my private life. It's like I'm always the one railing against bureaucracy. But I have thought, because I railed against it for so long, there's part of me that has come to understand some of the reasons why it exists and do think that there's some benefit in it, because it is trying, I think, to attain sort of what I was getting at, like this truth of numbers that comes from having more people think about a problem. And then there is in doing that, you can be more assured that you're probably solving a problem correctly.
Right. But this is where something like a university with tenure that shelters people from market forces makes sense.
Right.
But most of those professors don't have the ability to make decisions for other people. Mm-hmm. This is where I'm saying the especially. So if you want to make an organization that does that, I don't care.
Right. Well, and it gets back to something we've said, though, as I think we've kind of agree on this, of that the more you abstract away from reality, the more likely you are to get yourself into trouble. And so that is, I think, maybe your trepidation when you extract and abstract volition to groups, is that, you know, again, you're getting yourself into the realm of fantasy, and you can always misinterpret fantasy.
And I think especially when you use the word society, so to bring it back to Nietzsche, I think especially when you use the word society and you start speaking for society, that's a very particular group. Because what you're saying is everybody who lives here, I get to say what they all want or don't want, which makes very little sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Or you've committed a crime against all of them. So, like, if you speed, you've somehow committed a crime against everybody.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, it's interesting because it's like, so Nietzsche's fundamentally saying, I think, he does want a return to, basically, he wants people to realize that the morals that we're sort of debating the origins of are made up.
Right.
And also they're difficult to find the origin because they're all coming from this will that life has to power. Mm-hmm. And so the response is just a bunch of iterations of responding. Like, you know, one society develops some type of moral system by striving to power, and then another system develops in response to that striving of power. Right. So I think he sort of makes the point that the genealogy is not necessarily going to be easy to interpret either.
Right.
But anyway, I'm just trying to put a pin on it of, like, I feel like he's fundamentally getting at this idea that he thinks that we need to go back to or at least recognize that all the morals that we have are made up. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you think that's what he's saying?
I think so. I feel like I didn't get far. I feel like I was still in another example of a type of moral structure.
Right.
Because I feel like maybe that's like my summation of what I took from the chapter was it's sort of like it was a little bit of a genealogy. It used to be this way, then it was this way, and then it was this way. But it was kind of like Foucault. Like, this is the way that they thought about morals here.
Exactly.
This is the way they thought about morals here. This is the way they thought about morals here.
Right. Anthropological.
Yeah, maybe something like
whatever.
That.
Or archaeological. Whatever.
And then in the end, there is no sort of right or one way to conceptualize it. It's very Plato.
Right.
I actually had a note about it seeming like Plato's discussion on justice at one point.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's interesting because, I mean, he sort of rails against Socrates.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, he's an interesting bloke, isn't he?
Well, I'm excited for the third one.
What's it called? What is the meaning of ascetic ideas? Uh-oh. Oh, thus spoke Zarathustra. Oh, I was thinking of calling the title of this episode, Thus Spoke Antooshka. What do you think of that? Or I don't know. If you have any other better ideas.
Says Mr. X, Dr. X.
Yeah.
You're going to be
It doesn't work as well. Yeah. Dr. X. No, shh.
Is that your father?
Shh. Keep that on the DL.
I didn't say what kind of doctor.
Yeah.
I keep that on the DL.
Yeah. Cool. And have you started thinking about what you want us to read next?
Oh, I'm toying with maybe the Anarchist Handbook or a Michael Malice thing, maybe, but it'll be a lot easier to read.
Yeah. You gonna have me read the White Pill?
What now?
Are you gonna have me read the White Pill?
The White Pill. Well, what the White Pill's like a history of the Soviet Union. Or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that could be interesting too.
Yeah.
Maybe kind of bleak.
Yeah. It's up to you. The Anarchist Handbook would be interesting. That's that one written by. You said it's like a millennial that wrote it, right?
No, Michael Malice wrote that.
Oh, the Anarchist Handbook.
Yeah,
I'm thinking of the Antifa thing.
Oh no, I don't want to read that. No, the Anarchist Handbook goes through like the history of anarchy and its different iterations and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'd be interested.
The black flag comes in all colors.
Yeah. I would be down for that. That sounds interesting. Yeah, cool.
All right.
You doing well?
Am I? Yeah, doing fine.
Your hair is. You're getting into the. I feel like the road warrior look.
Yes. It's kind of stopped growing. I mean, it's not really getting longer very fast. But
interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I had to learn a crazy tune this last week that shifted from 15/16 time to 1/4 time every other month.
Wow. Jeez. Oh, how's learning all those pieces for that one group that you're like on a list for now?
Oh, it's fine. It's going slow. I mean, I have other gigs where I have to learn, so I'm kind of like on the back burner learning those as just kind of a couple at a time.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I should hit that harder, but they haven't called me yet, so maybe they won't.
Well, and how do you even keep that in your, like, you could say short-term memory?
I mean, I make charts and stuff so that I have them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you must have played enough of those types of songs now that like you see all the similar, all the.
They're not hard. It's like little things. It's like the Party in the USA or something. Like that's a very specific guitar lick at the beginning,
right?
And then being ready to play it in any key, kind of a thing.
Wow. Dang.
Cool.
Oh yeah, because you were saying why? So why do they change keys on a beat like that?
It would just be like for the singer, if the singer would rather sing it in a different key.
Yeah, these singers, they just go around requesting key changes like it's no problem. God.
Well, and I think for certain types of musicians, it's no problem. Like a lot of horn players, they can do that easily. And guitar players don't have that hard a time with it, except certain types of riffs.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if it's just in like one position and you can slide it up and down the neck, that's super easy.
Right.
Horns, actually, though, I would think is kind of difficult.
I think it's hard. I think they just develop that skill really well.
Yeah, I know. I'm always amazed at pianists. I mean, we're so bad, honestly, compared as we talked about this all the time as how bad guitarists are, like compared to other instrumentalists. It's just because the pedagogy, we don't have as good of a pedagogy built up. Like,
it's pretty funny. Like I see these crazy awesome blues guitar players around town.
Yeah,
and then you watch it. Somebody calls like a Taylor Swift song, and they try and solo on it, and it sounds like ass. It's like, don't play blues on that. It sounds really bad.
I know, it's amazing. Yeah, or like just sight reading, so difficult. God, that's cool. But your shows, I mean, I feel like, do you feel like you're gaining momentum? I don't know.
Think so.
Like honestly, I've felt like your posts have been gaining larger likes, traffic, and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I got this show out in Bandera next weekend that I'm hoping get some good people. I haven't done tons of out of town shows yet, and so it's like I'm trying to build the circle, but it could be but nobody there. I hope.
Yeah, you're working so much though. I feel like you're making big waves. You must be.
So. I hope, but it's pretty common. It's like a lot of people are doing that here. I'm not working more than the other Austin guys.
Yeah. But you are working, I guess, is the point. Yep. Yeah. And I feel like you've got into the community pretty quickly too, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was thinking about this. Like this time last year, I had maybe half the gigs I have now. So.
Mm-hmm. And when did you move there? I can't remember.
2 years ago, almost to the day.
Wow.
Yep.
Man, yeah, I've been here for 5 years. I can't believe it. Where does the time go, Antooshka? Ask
it goes
Nietzsche.
Into reading philosophy.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I mean, this one was an arduous one.
It was good though. I liked it.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yep.
I'm glad.
Right.
Okay.
Cool.
Once you confirm what you want to do, let me know because I'll order the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Sweet. All right.
Cool. All right. See you.
See ya.